I'm recording this intro on March 14th, 2020. In the past 2 or 3 days, things have gotten pretty crazy here in the US, been crazy elsewhere for a while. And it's definitely too soon to tell. Like, is this enough? Is this too little? What's this going to look like? How bad is this going to get? So anything I say will likely age poorly. So let's get to the interview. Kiera Dent from the Dental A-Team podcast, a good friend of our show. We love having her on the podcast anytime we can get her on. This was from Voices of Dentistry, and Kiera just lays it out. These are always an amazing interview. So enjoy this with Kiera Dent. Kiera, welcome back to the show. It's been a little while.
It has been a while, Richard. I'm so happy to see you and talk to you and just be a part of this again.
We were just talking about you.
Oh.
After you podcast bombed our episode.
Has anybody ever podcast bombed?
Not on our show.
I didn't even think it was a thing until I did it. And then I thought it was a great thing.
You should do it. I mean, there's literally podcast recordings going on all around us.
I'm just going to go around. Why do whole episodes when I can just
make it? You know what? I really want to get a lot of exposure.
I do.
You just walk around and like, hey guys,
done.
I know you're in the middle of an interview. I'm Kiera Dent. I'm awesome. Bye.
That's what I plan to do. I'm hitting up all these podcasts today.
That's good.
I'm going to play like tic-tac-toe and see how many of these I can get.
It's like bingo for like the old folks.
Bingo's a better way to say it.
Yeah,
yes, agreed. Blackout.
Blackout, all the above. We were talking about how you made an appearance at George's office.
I did. I felt like my world combined on that. It was a really fun but trip moment for me, to be honest.
Okay.
Because George, I knew him as like a little baby dentist, just like I knew you. You guys were going through school, and then to see him as this very elite leader, I was actually, and it's not because George, I know him and I'm on your podcast and I should like butter him up. Reality is, George was very, very sophisticated in his business ownership when I met him, which I was incredibly impressed by. And it was really fun to see him and to play the role of, hey, remember when I used to hand you teeth in the sim and when you'd botch it, or I'd give you wax or whatever it was, to, hey, let me talk to you about how to grow your practice and learn from you as well. It was a really fun serendipity moment for me.
I think we need a term for Kiera. Like there's like a little bit of a backlash around the term baby dentist right now.
I'm sorry. I don't mean it in any derogatory way.
When she was a baby consultant. She was actually more of an embryo consultant at that point.
I don't think I was even a consultant. I was a tooth lunch lady is what I was.
I think you see so many offices. You're in so many offices. You have such a unique perspective. Has there been an office like George's that you've walked into before?
Yes. George wasn't anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that he had like this really cool implant form, and the ones who were only doing single implants, he called the clunker patient, like a clunker car. That was totally cool. Beyond that, he was pretty normal. But what I loved about George's practice when I walked in, and you're right, we've seen over hundreds of offices. I've physically been in over 100 offices.
I don't understand how you can do it. It's amazing.
It's been a few years since I saw you guys in school, so I guess like a few laps around the world.
Yeah.
But George, what I liked about his practice was George has a really good leadership and structure and systems already in place. So a lot of times when I see offices and doctors, they're not strong on their leadership, meaning and I know you guys coach this, which is so fantastic, but the doctor's not willing to hold the team accountable. They have this very entitled mentality, and that's a very hard practice to coach.
The team or the doctor?
The team. And it's because the doctor doesn't want to hold them accountable. And so I say empowerment without accountability leads to entitlement. And so
that's like the abdication, just like, you guys got this, see ya.
Right.
But not follow up, or there is no standard, or we're not tracking this, we don't follow up with it.
Right. And George also is like a brand new dentist owner. You
can say baby dentist.
No,
he's not now.
He wasn't
not when you were in his office.
No, when he was a graduated full-time dentist at that point. He
right.
wasn't a baby dentist in school. But George, he knew his numbers.
Yeah.
And I loved that. His sophistication on business ownership was far superior to a lot of offices I've been in. And I loved it because he was year one in ownership.
Right.
And that's what I was just very impressed with. So George, also I think it helps that it was also weird that we knew each other, because I wondered, is he actually going to be coachable, since, we both knew each other before we were who we are today.
Right.
But George is very coachable. He's very open. And what I noticed with him was it was just a lot of front office systems and areas that really, where do you guys ever learn that information?
Right.
It's lacking. So therefore, that was probably his weakest zone. And for me, that's really easy to pick up on. We could pick up on that even just reading office forms, but that's not uncommon. But what George had is he'd already built a fertilized zone that was ready for great culture of ownership and accountability and responsibility. So as a coach coming in, his team was prepped and primed for us that it was a very easy transition and change working with him.
We're talking about leadership, culture, and change. Sorry, George needs his car keys. They're in my pocket.
Oh, it's fine. George, you can just interrupt, or I can teach you sign language.
Bomb.
I forgot that we podcast bomb around here.
Podcast bomb. George, we're talking about your practice. Perfect podcast.
We're done with your practice now. You can leave. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, George.
We're doing a whole season on leadership, culture, and change.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times, dentists don't know that they need to work on their leadership.
Correct. And that's exactly when they need to work on their leadership.
Right. So how do you get that light bulb moment? Because that has to be so hard as an in-office consultant when it's like, you're the problem here.
Yes. And that's what it is a lot of times. But I also think as a coach, people don't call me when they think everything's roses and butterflies most of the time.
Sure.
I mean, typically they know that there are problems. And I really ask them kind of back to traction. We rave about it. I know I got George turned on to that.
We talked about it in the last episode here.
You guys, I'm obsessed. But what I find is these doctors, as a coach, my job is to be pretty black and white. So in a very loving, empowering way, like, okay, do you want to solve this problem forever? Or do we just want to work on surface level? Like, you let me know how you want to go. And some docs are totally ready for leadership. And so what I found is I'll go into an office and doctors are usually looking for an ROI change. They want to see a spike in production, or they want to see this system in place.
We're hiring you to come in, and so we want to see the dollar signs here as a direct, like, input X, put in money to this machine, get money out of the machine.
Exactly. And I don't blame you. As a business owner, I'm the same way. If I'm hiring a coach, I better see an ROI. Otherwise, it's not worth the investment. So what I find is always giving a tangible and an intangible when we're in an office. Meaning, hey, here's a system and here are pieces that are tangible. I know if you follow this, you'll see results. However, I'm leaving. I'm Mary Poppins. I came in, I changed your world. And the way to hold this through is you've got to carry it through.
Right.
So an intangible is maybe how to have hard conversations. Or, hey, is this a story or is it a fact that you're dealing with? So some of those intangible pieces help to develop that leadership thing. And it's like planting little seeds and then really helping them in 6 weeks. Hey, I'll hold your hand. I'll help you stay accountable to me. You hold your team accountable so I can be the bad guy as the coach coming in.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives them like a fresh start if they choose to take it. And for me, I'm really big on, hey, here's the invitation. Let me meet you where you're at and grow you into that leadership zone. And sometimes my job is to be black and white, like with George. Hey, this is what you need. He's ready to go. He's very open.
Yeah.
He will do whatever. Other doctors are like, it's kind of like a patient who comes in who's very embarrassed about their mouth. It's a hard zone.
It is.
So it really, I think as coaches, our job is also to read our doctors, meet you where you're at. But then at the same time, end all be all, let's just put it out there. Your team is a direct reflection of you. Whatever you're seeing in your team, the reason it's there is probably because you have that as a trait in you. So if you're like, hey, they're not accountable, look at yourself. Are you accountable? Hey, they never follow through with things. Look at yourself. Do you follow through with things? Hey, they never clean up after themselves. Look at yourself. How's your car? How's your room? How's your house? Do you leave the cupboards open at your house? Because typically what we see in other people, we only see it because we have it within ourselves. And so when I can start to plant those little seeds and people listening today, if you can start to look at yourself this way, that's, I think, the breeding ground of leadership and accountability and just a very small percolation. I just had a doctor. I've coached him for about 2 years. He was not ready for accountability until this last visit. And now he said, I need to change. We're changing. We're fixing these things. I realized you fixed all the systems, Kiera, but they didn't stick because I didn't hold it accountable. And so it's one of those things, I mean, keep paying me to come in, but it's never going to stick.
You can't be there all the time.
I can't, nor should I,
Right.
because then you're dependent on me. You didn't learn the skills needed.
Right.
Just like you're not going to walk a child for the rest of their life, like left foot, left foot. No, they have to grow and learn. So I think a lot of it is, for us, is one, help the doctor see how they can do it in a very easy, simple way. And also I think the benefit we bring is from a team member's perspective. I can tell you, hey doc, I want you to tell me what you expect of me. My job, like what I want as a team member is to make your life easy. I want to make you happy. So help me help you, because really at the end of the day, I want to help you have the best day of your life. And if you're always letting me get off the hook and you're not holding me or Susie accountable so we can do whatever we want, that doesn't make for a happy place at the office. Like, I am desperate as a team member for you to stay consistent and accountable as my doctor and owner, because I look to you and you set the tone for the whole office.
How often do you feel that the doc builds up in their head what they think the team will respond as when they start holding people accountable, when they start having expectations and then revisiting those expectations, versus the reality? Like,
All the time. Like, I've told the story of my neighbor, and she woke up one morning and she was watching this car go from house to house to house. It was dark outside, and she had convinced herself that, oh my gosh, someone is robbing our neighborhood. Like, they'll go to this house, they'll stop, then they go to the next house, and then to the next house. Well, what we found out, she called the police, like, there is someone ambushing our neighborhood. It ended up being the milkman delivering milk early in the morning. And I think that's the same for doctors. Oh, well, if I hold them accountable, they won't like me. If I hold them accountable, they'll all quit. If I hold them accountable, they will, they're going to take arms against me and they will completely sabotage my business. And the reality is, no. Yes, you will get a little bit of pushback because it's different. But all it is you're now creating a more efficient, easy, and safe environment. When you're consistent with those rules and those guidelines, your team feels safe. Like, that's one great thing about George. His team, maybe they don't love him all the time, but I think the best characteristic
George, I think your team loves you all the time.
Good job. I think George, he told me this, so this is not off script. But he said the compliment that they give him is that they say that George is fair.
Right.
And so George isn't people pleasing. He's not trying to schmooze. He does what's fair, and his team feels safe. And it's crazy cool because we can put so many systems into place in his office and they'll stay because he's fair. So to your point, to the milk story, there's 90% of the time, ask yourself, is this truly a fact, or is this a story that I'm choosing to live and to stay in fear when it's just a story and there's no fact? And I will tell you from a team's perspective, 95% of all team members will stay when you hold them accountable, and they're actually relieved because their life is easier, as opposed to more stressful trying to figure out what you want, and you're always changing your answer based on who I am.
Right.
It's never consistent.
So you are queen of accountability.
I try to be.
Yeah, in a good way. How do you hold someone accountable and keep it safe and positive at the same time? So, say that you're trying to implement a financial system in your office and you're trying to say, hey, we want to offer our patients options that are really simple. We've got this form. We need to fill it out. We need to go over with them before treatment at some point, whether it's, when we first present treatment or before their appointment. And you're worried that your team is not doing this. And sure enough, you go and audit and they're not always doing this. What would you do? How do you handle this where you're like, this system we're trying to implement, I thought we, trained on it. We've talked about it. We know it's an expectation. I told you guys that I was going to check and hold you accountable. Now, what do you do? What do you say?
Super good question. And let me just back up a little bit. Queen of
All
accountability. Okay, back it all the way up to George's practice. They love him.
Right.
But queen of accountability, yes, thank you for that, but that's not my normal state. My normal state is not to hold people accountable. I don't like that nitty-gritty, like, it feels so exhausting to hold people accountable. This is actually a learned trait that I've had to develop. So, I mean, if you look at me as a child, accountability was not my thing. And so
you weren't born holding people accountable?
I wasn't, believe it or not.
Did you hold yourself accountable until, past age 19? Probably not.
You look at my room when I was younger, I was kind of a messy child. Like, I didn't care about those things. I remember thinking, I'm going to be a boss because I don't like being a team lead. I can't hold people accountable. And I only say that to help people realize, I think so often we create this story again that, well, I'm just not good at accountability. Kiera's really good at accountability, so that's just not who I am. Guess what? It's not who I am either.
Right.
But I've realized that in order to grow, I have to hold people accountable because they depend on me as a leader to keep things consistent and moving forward. So
wait, can I share one more thing on that?
Of course.
So one thing that has helped me get better at holding people accountable is that I've seen when people aren't accountable, when someone is not performing,
Mm-hmm.
it is a burden on the entire team.
Correct.
And ultimately, you have to hold people accountable for everyone's sake, because otherwise other people pick up the slack, they become resentful, they become
Correct.
sad, frustrated, depressed, it's stressed out, and they want to quit your practice, something breaks, there's the final straw. So you put your whole practice at jeopardy because you don't hold people to the job that they are there to do.
Right.
They're getting paid to do.
Yes.
So anyways, so that helped me.
Yes.
That's seeing that and seeing the results of when one person isn't pulling their weight and someone else who's a high performer is covering down for that other person and picking up the slack. That is damaging and unsustainable and unfair.
Yes.
And I had to have a conviction of that to then be able to have the courage to hold people accountable. And I'm still not that great at it. I just want to be better at it. So.
Well, that's good. The want is there, but you're exactly right. And so for you to see, I tell myself a lot that I have a moral obligation to my team as their leader to hold people accountable. So that becomes my standard. And they always say, if you want to change your life, change your standards. So what is your standard? Do you hold them accountable to these things, or do you just allow there to be mayhem? And it's crazy because when you said that, like the team's frustrated, they're upset, they're wanting to quit. All those fears that most people have of what's going to happen if they hold them accountable, guess what? Those fears are already happening because you're not holding them accountable.
Yeah.
So like if we can just dispel that and you can see that, I think it becomes easier. And then to your point, I heard a quote a little while ago, and they said, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And so we can develop these new skills of holding them accountable. You're just learning a new muscle right now, and you're just practicing it over and over and over again until it becomes permanent. So I love it because what we practice doesn't become perfect, it just becomes permanent. And if we don't like what's permanent, change it and practice that so that does become permanent. And that's what I feel like, no, my natural state was not to hold people accountable. It's just a muscle I've built and developed over time, like you said, because I wanted it and I realized my moral obligation as an owner, as a leader, as a boss, as a team lead, whatever position you're in, my moral obligation is to hold people accountable and make their life the best that it can be. And if I'm not living to that, how can I expect my team to live up to their high expectations as well?
Right. No, that's fantastic. And there needs to be a conviction behind it. And the more conviction you have, I think that's what you now embody is the conviction behind accountability, unapologetically, in the most positive, best way possible.
Right.
And so the results are really good because you're not doing this from, I think there's also a fear of motives. So are you holding me accountable and getting strict because you need to make more money and pay off your boat?
Right.
And people fear that that's a perception when in reality it's like, no, this is, we're here on a common purpose. We're here as a family, and it hurts us when people aren't doing their job.
Totally. And as you were saying that, it made me think, I mean, this is going to go to your financial policy example. You asked me, like, how do I hold them accountable? And to give you a real life example, because I'm really big on tangibles. I don't like to talk fluff and like, hey, this theory or this idea.
Yeah.
It's like, what does Kiera Dent actually do? I have a new team member, and bottom line was she was not living up to the accountability. She wasn't following through with clients. And I thought, golly, if you're not doing this, like we put this into place. There are step-by-steps, just to your point, there are step-by-steps for this financial policy. So finally I had a conversation with her, and I'm very black and white.
Yeah.
I don't beat around the bush a lot because I've just found like that's inefficient. Also, people feel very safe. They know I will be very upfront with them in a very loving way. So I kind of took it from George, like, I want to be fair. Like that's truly the compliment I want to have. And this team member told me, she said, Kiera, you know, we talked on Friday and I was actually kind of offended by what you said. And I listened to her and I said, okay, like, thank you for telling me. I didn't apologize because I wasn't truly sorry.
Right.
I wasn't apologetic for what I said. Because I really did just hold her accountable to the standards we put into place. And I said, thank you for telling me. I think it takes vulnerability to share that. With that said, we don't say but. Because if I say, thank you for telling me, but, I just negated. I'm not really thankful for that.
Yeah.
So I said, thank you for telling me. About that, let's discuss a little bit more of what I really was trying to intend, making sure it landed correctly. But I did not stop. And I told her, I said, the bottom line is, you not following through with clients is unacceptable, and I refuse to lower my level of excellence to meet your need for mediocrity. And that's a bold statement for me to say. And maybe I should have word ninja'd that a smidge. That's a quote from Keith Cunningham, and I love it because, and I told her, I said, you might be offended by this. You might not take it. I said, but guess what? You know I will always be upfront with you. I will always tell you. And if we look at this, can you see any area that you could have maybe done it a little bit differently? And she said, yeah, I didn't follow through with clients. That was on me. And I said, fantastic. We've had this conversation. There's no point beating it around the bush. 10 seconds, here's the issue. Now let's spend the rest of the time to solve this forever. Okay. And then I asked her for a follow-up. I said, okay, we've talked about this. What's your follow-up that you're going to do based on what we talked about? So I know there's true change. Now for dentists, when you said, how do I have this conversation? Well, great. You said you're going to check on it. You did check on it. Now we hold them accountable. 10 seconds. Hey, I noticed we're not using this. Let's talk about it. I'm okay. This is the issue. There's no right, wrong. This is the issue. Identify it. Now let's find a way to solve it. And this is where a lot of doctors, I coach them on. Instead of you giving the solution, ask the team member, hey, this is the standard. This is what we expect. So you're not lowering your level of excellence.
Right.
Again, you might not say to meet your need for mediocrity.
Right.
That's what it is. But say, so how can we hold you accountable? What's your plan to solve this? And a lot of doctors tell me, team members are like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, sweet, we're going to sit here on a stare off then because we're coming up with a solution. And I don't want to build it because if you build it, you're going to hold yourself more accountable to it.
Okay, I just want to step back.
Okay.
Do you tell people to actually say that? We're going to sit here on a stare off.
If they're going to play the game with me of just sitting there.
I don't know.
I'm like, okay, great. So we're actually not leaving until there's a true solution made. And I'm happy to sit here with you as long as it takes. And I know that might sound...
I absolutely love the sweet boldness of just okay, great. We're going to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when you can
unapologetic.
Get that...
You and George, that's the unapologetic chair today of just, this is the way it is. And that's what we're doing.
But I think so often when you can be that way, your team knows.
Yeah.
Okay, Kiera, I don't want a culture of excuses, period. I just don't have the time, the energy, that's inefficient. Why are we doing this? Fantastic, we botched it. Okay, great. This was the problem, what's the solution? And when you start to have that culture, your team stops staying unaccountable. I mean, just the other day, Kaylee is amazing in our company. She is so on top of it. She completely botched a contract with a client. We sent 3 contracts to the same client on the same email thread with 3 different fees. High five. That feels real gross. So I said, hey, Kaylee. And Kaylee is my rock star, top notch. I said, hey, this is where we're at. What's the solution so this doesn't happen again? And she's like, solution is I'm going to reread all emails to make sure I don't ever do this again. There was no argument. There was no
There's no defensiveness.
Nothing.
Of hey.
Because our culture is one of we fail successfully, and we better fail successfully. Otherwise, we're not trying hard enough. But if they know, I will hold them accountable. And the accountability is, oh, sweet, there was the problem. What's the solution? And let's move forward. So I think to your point, hey, we put in this financial policy. So often doctors get all emotionally attached to it. Oh, well, we said this and now you're not doing it.
I'm offended.
It's no, here's the problem. Okay, we put this financial policy in place. Let's talk about it. This is an expectation. I want this used for every patient. And do we understand why? Team's yeah, totally get it. Okay, fantastic. Now let's talk about a solution so we can ensure we use this for every patient. And I will say that when things are tracked in any way possible you can track in your practice, instantly the emotion goes away, the accountability is there, and that's to me, that's where leadership becomes very easy. Numbers don't lie. Numbers cut emotion from it. It's very black and white. We see the data. I love a quote from Tony Robbins, and he says, there are no failures, there are just results. So I ask that a lot. Okay, here are the results we're getting. Are they the results we want or not? If they're not, what are we going to do to change that? And building a culture that embraces and embodies this. Team members will leave, guaranteed. They will leave because this no longer fits their style. But the team that you develop will be so amazing, your life is easier. And I can say that with full confidence because I've done both teams. My team in Colorado was not an accountable team. I didn't do this perfectly. Your
own coaching.
Oh my gosh. When I used to work with Sage, my team was not an accountable team. I didn't know how to have these hard conversations. I didn't know how to be black and white, unapologetic. I was like, let me be your best friend. Let me tell you what I think you want to hear.
Yeah.
And it created more drama, stress, and frustration. I had turnover, and I was like, gosh dang, that's why I got really good at hiring, because I had all this turnover. But to the point of, when you can be unapologetic and create a culture of ownership, but that starts with you.
Yeah.
Do you own your mistakes, and do you come up with a solution? And I also say, like, we get to come up with 3 solutions. So financial policy wasn't put into play. What are 3 solutions? And then let's choose the one that's going to go, and then we'll revisit it in a week or 2. But that follow-up on your end, again, I'm not great at it. I literally go to my computer, send myself an email, boomerang it to myself in 2 weeks so I don't forget to follow up. I'm terrible at following up, and I have 165 clients. I had to find a way to do it. Like, unapologetic who I really am.
Yeah.
That was at least what worked for me.
That's so awesome. Thank you for walking us through that.
I hope it walked you through. What questions do you have, Richard? Because I said a lot of pieces.
No, so let me try and just parrot this back a little bit.
Okay.
For our listeners and for my own selfish sake.
Yes.
So we agreed upon and established this financial policy. Since then, we haven't implemented that with every patient. What is going on? Okay, critique me now. What did I say wrong there?
Okay, so I think you did a great job. I really love to ask them, like when you said, like, we implemented this, we all agreed to it. I at that point would say, like, let's talk about why. Why did we implement this? You want to make sure they understand the why behind it.
Right.
Because a lot of times them not implementing is because they're not concrete as to why we're doing this.
Right.
So if you're noticing a system's not executing, find out if they really know why it's happening. So that's a piece, and I didn't really coach that. So
would so let me try this.
Okay.
We talked about this financial page that we're putting together, options for patients. I've noticed that we're not getting it done for every patient. I want to make sure you understand. For you, what do you see as the reason why we're doing this?
Beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful, because at this point, you are no longer on the defense, like, hey, I'm coming at you. Why aren't you doing this? It's more like, hey, I'm on your team.
Right.
Like, I want to make sure you understand why, so you're confident talking to patients about it. Right there, you can actually solve a ton of your problems and not even create the blow up or the piece from there. So I thought that one was phenomenal, because you just like buddied up on my side. You're really truly coming from the inquiry, the inquisitive mind. Why are we doing this? So we're all on the same page.
Right.
Then from there, I would word ninja that, and you can tell me to word. I mean, hello, I said, I refuse to lower my standards of excellence to meet your need for mediocrity. So, I mean, we can take coaching together on
Right.
this. I just think that quote is so good.
You
I
were
use it.
waiting. How often do you say that?
I say it a lot because I think it's so good. And I remember my team, when they first heard that from me, they're like, ooh, that's harsh, but true. But So then to your point of, like, hey, we implemented this, what's going wrong? A lot of times when we use the word wrong, they feel like they're wrong. So instead, I might suggest identifying, hey, I told you guys I'd check in on it. I noticed it's not being done. Fact. That's a fact, not a story.
No judgment to it.
No judgment. Like, I noticed it wasn't happening. So that's the result. That's not the result we're looking for. So let's talk about why it's not implementing and what we can do to solve this forever. So
Okay. So let's talk about why it's not being implemented and what we can do to solve this forever. That line, what we can do to solve this forever, you've said that a few times.
thank you, traction.
Yeah. That's so amazing. Such an amazing concept of, like, instead of focusing on just like this minute circumstance, problem, excuse, issue of what's going on here, let's build this and solve this once and for all. It puts them in a different mindset. And also is kind of empowering and high standard. Like, you're setting the bar a little higher.
And that's exactly what it is. Because we just took our team, like you said, could we be focusing on this small piece? Well, usually, guys, just so you know, the symptoms you're getting are the result of a deeper problem. It's usually not the top surface level. So that's why I always start with the why. If they don't understand, that could be the deeper rooted reason why they're not implementing. But then you go to, like, let's solve this forever. And you're exactly right. I purposely stole that from traction to raise the team to a higher level of thinking. If they can think higher, if they can think like, okay, great, we're not just solving this problem, we're solving it forever. you instantly think differently because it's not going to say like, well, we could just try harder. Does that solve it forever?
No.
And I'm really good at also probing that question. And I'll say, does that really solve it forever? Let's make sure we're not just putting into like a new system in place.
I'll just try harder.
Okay,
Does
great.
that solve it forever?
Does that solve it forever? No, it does not.
Right.
Let's come up with something that really, truly will solve this forever. Well, we could have it printed, or, we could actually add it to our treatment plan so they can initial off which one they want to choose. That would truly solve it forever. We don't even have to think about it.
Right.
We just put it onto our treatment plan. That would solve it forever. We could also have it as like a menu that we hand our patients so we remember to do it every time. We could track it so we know how many patients we actually did it on. Those things will solve it forever. And sometimes, people tell me, and I do think that this is one of those just lucky gifts I was given. I'm very good at idea generation. So sometimes in offices, it's hard to come up with these solutions. But when you get a team together and you're truly trying to solve a problem forever, your team will generate ideas that will blow your mind. And then you just empower them. You're like, yes, let's go with that. Let's try it out. I'll check back in 2 weeks.
Okay. Do you feel like 2 weeks is like you keep bringing that up. That's like a perfect amount of time for someone to forget about something.
Right. It is.
And if it wasn't going to happen, by that point, you'll know one way or another, is it happening or not?
Right. And 2 weeks, I'm glad you brought that up. I do suggest when you go to implement something new, it's building a new muscle memory. So if you can check in on it pretty regularly at the very beginning, you save yourself hours and hours and hours of time later because you're just staying on top of it. Like, hey guys, and I hate to follow up with people. I really do. Clearly, I've announced my weaknesses over here. So I say I'm lazy or efficient, take your pick.
Right.
But I tell them like, hey, so let's have you report this back to me each night. So however you guys want to track this, just make sure you turn it into me each night as we're building this new muscle together. I rarely will be like, I'll come check in on you. I tell them I'll check in 2 weeks, but we need to have a way to track this so that way we can make sure we're not missing something between here and now. I want to set you up for success.
Cool. Well, I'm trying to think if there's any part of that I didn't role play, but is there?
I think you did a really good job. You went through the why, and then it was how do we solve this forever?
Right. And I think the only part was if they're like, don't have any solutions at all. Then,
Let's role play that.
that.
Okay, so Dr. Richard, you come to me, tell me, let's solve this forever. Go ahead, role play, and I'll be your employee that's nasty.
So how can we solve this? No, how can we figure out a solution so we can solve this forever?
I don't have any ideas.
Okay. Well, we're gonna sit here and come up with some ideas.
Yes.
You first. Let's come up with 3.
I don't know.
I got plenty of time, so we're
Yes.
not gonna leave.
There you go. When they know you're truly serious at this, it's kind of like a parent. I'm not a parent, you're a parent. But once they realize you're serious and we're really not leaving, they're like, okay, he's totally serious. I better come up with ideas. And what's cool is you just made it uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they know from here on out, if there's an issue, they have to have 3 solutions because we're literally going to sit here. So it's just you being accountable and consistent with yourself to hold them accountable. So I'd be like, well, you could... And as soon as your employee starts even thinking of remote ideas, capitalize on that. Like, hey, I love it. You got it. Even if it's the worst idea,
Right.
at least compliment that they came up with something. Like,
Validate
great.
that.
Let's put this on the board. Let's keep going because when we're in the mode of ideas, more ideas will come.
Right.
Maybe you can toss out an idea, and so you can volley back and forth, but truly compliment them. But just like you said, I've got all the time. Even if the patient's breathing down your back, sit there. It's kind of like my husband. He got pulled over the other day, and it was like the SWAT team came after him. Like,
What?
It was kind of wild, and he wasn't doing anything. It was just someone coming, and she's like, "Oh, you must be late for work. That's why you're speeding." And my husband's really brilliant at this. He's like, "Nope, got all the time in the world," and just kind of smiled at her. And she's like, "You probably should leave earlier for work." And he's like, "Nope, not late at all." And so because he put that back, she had nothing to rebuttal. So by you saying like, got all the time in the world, their defense that they're coming at you just you just dissipated it. They have no more defense because
Right.
they now are like, well, all the excuses I would give, he's just sitting here very casually and we're really going to come up with 3 solutions.
Right. I'm so distracted right now. There's like, we're gonna have to talk offline about the story about your husband and the SWAT team. Like,
I'll tell you real quick. It was
Okay, thank you.
He literally just came off the freeway and this is what was really funny. He was technically late for work, and it was technically my fault. And so like that's what's really funny about this whole thing. And so he was going, and this guy like stopped at a green light. So my husband goes through, like the guy finally moves. My husband goes through. It's yellow, and the guy was like in the right lane, and so he just went around him real quick because he's trying to get to work.
Yeah.
It was a 35 and he was going 45. Well, then the cop comes behind him, and he's in the turning lane to turn left, and it's on this very narrow road, no shoulder. So the cop comes behind him. He's already in the left-hand turning lane, stopped, blinker on. Cop turns on his light. So he's like, okay, well, there's no shoulder here. I'm in the left-hand turning lane. I'll just pull over as soon as I turn. Well, then the cop gets on the loudspeaker and is like, pull over right now. So he's like, okay, I guess I crossed 3 lanes of traffic to where there's no shoulder on the road, but okay. So he pulls over, and because the cop pulls him over in the middle of the worst street you could pull over, they have to pull in more cops so the cops don't get hit. So there's like 3 cops to protect the road. And then this lady comes up to the window and is like, so you're late for work? Because you were driving aggressively and that man didn't know where he was going. And my husband's like, seriously, did you stop and have a conversation with this man? Like, how do you know he doesn't know where he's
You've
going?
told yourself a story about that man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he then was like, nope, got all the time in the world, because he realized he would diffuse the situation that she was trying to make him guilty when he wasn't guilty. And so to the point, I'm glad you actually had me go into this more, he diffused everything she tried to come at him with and was like, nope, got all the time in the world. She didn't give him a ticket. There was nothing that he, and he was able to diffuse the situation. She came back. She's like, well, maybe you should leave earlier for work next time. He's like, got all the time in the world, not late at all. And so she had nothing to go at him for because she's trying to rile him. Yeah. And he just diffused the situation.
Or admit guilt or,
Correct.
All that.
Correct. And so to your point of when an employee is like, hey, I don't have anything, or they're just going to sit there and stand off, you diffuse that instead of playing into it. Like, no, you have to give me an answer right now. It's like, great. Well, we're going to sit here because we're going to find a solution forever, because I don't want to have this conversation with you again.
Right.
Remember, come to their same side. You're on their side. You're truly, bottom line is, if you can come with a genuine intent, I'm on your team. I don't want to have this conversation with you. Let's solve this forever so we can solve it and move on. And when your team starts to develop that culture, it's crazy how quickly they'll come up with their own solutions. Hey, Dr. Richard, we had this problem, but we came up with this solution. Just wanted to let you know. And you're like, high five.
Awesome.
My life's easy.
So then the last step, because now I remember this one. So, okay, awesome. So we're going to do that. And while you're developing this muscle memory of using this form, I just want you to keep track of it, whether it's a Post-it note or something. And at the end of the night, shoot me an email with how many of those forms you filled out that day.
Perfect.
And then in 2 weeks, we'll circle back and we'll revisit how it's going.
Yep, exactly. And I love that. And then I'm going to tie one more piece on, because a lot of times after you have these conversations, communication's only 5%. We only hear 5% of the words that are actually spoken. So a lot of it could be missed. So I love, like, at the end of it, like, hey, let's just recap. Make sure this landed the way we were both trying to talk about it. What did you hear and what's our solution? So you kind of do a quick recap at the end. And I know I'm giving a lot of steps, so you might like get 2 of the 5 or whatever it is.
These are all different tools to use.
Exactly. And you might be in different phases of your leadership. But if you have that recap at the end, you can always make sure that they heard it correctly. It's a very active listening. Thank you, marriage and family therapy undergrad. But it's a very active listening, and say like, hey, let's just make sure we're on the same page. What did you hear? How did that land? I want to make sure the way I communicated clearly. They'll repeat it back. You can clarify, or you can be like, yep, we're on the same page. We've got this 2 weeks. I'll follow up with you. You're going to email me every night. And we're doing this because of X. Making sure that they really do fully understand. Just like you did, pair it back to me. Make sure you got all the pieces.
Right.
And if not, let's clean that up.
Well, this has been incredible. This has been so much fun. This is like, I love having interviews with you, Kiera, because I can just like keep digging deeper. I'm like, wait, no, tell me more.
Yes.
Get me specifics. And you're like, okay, here you go, dish. You just like dish up all these amazing little nuggets and specifics and phrasings. And so thank you for spontaneously podcast bombing and then circling back 20 minutes
I just
later.
looked back around.
and I'm like, do you want to do an episode right now? You're like, sure, why not?
Sure.
Let's do it.
I love it. No, and I appreciate you guys. I've told you this off air, and I'll say it to you. Your fans, the people that follow you, your community you've built, are some of the most impressive people I've ever met. They're very they're very intuitive. They're very hungry for knowledge. And every person who's ever contacted me from this podcast, I have been blown away. So congrats to you guys. You and George do an amazing podcast. And I just feel like truly, genuinely honored to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. No, it's the amazing people. We just surrounded them, people like you on the show and others, and good people keep coming. So thank you.
I like it a lot. So you're doing a great job. So keep it up. And to your listeners, thank you for just being good people in this world of dental. It's really fun to hear that there's great people out there that we get to impact.
Well, I appreciate it. Likewise. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course.
We'll have you back another time.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard.
We'll see ya.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed Kiera's ability to hold people accountable and not feel bad about it and be so straightforward. This is a skill. This is something I need to work on. I'm a people pleaser. I'm more likely to have this conversation with myself than I am with someone else. So I have plenty to work on. You guys might have some things to work on too. If you want to hear more of Kiera, she's got her podcast, the Dental A-Team podcast. Check it out. Tell her that we sent you her way. We will talk with you guys next week on the Shared Practices podcast. I'm excited to announce a partnership with Sandy Pardue. We are rebooting the Dental Drill Bits podcast. Sandy and I sat down and said, what if we did a podcast together? What if we did a whole season of your show together? And it works out perfectly because I have a ton of questions and she has a ton of answers. So we combined my skill at asking questions, but not necessarily knowing the answer, and her skill at answering every single question with a wealth of knowledge, specific examples, and experience. If you want to get your dental practice organized, if you have trouble with understanding the roles and the functions and the systems of your office, join us every Tuesday on the Dental Drill Bits podcast.